Well, I decided to do another video about my ancestors. Now, I'm proud of a lot of my ancestors, and some of my ancestors I'm not very proud of what has happened or what they've done. I've already made a couple of videos, just recently, one about my grandpa born in a jail, but he wasn't an inmate. Now, this one, I think I'm going to start with my second great grandparents, all the way to the right. Edmund Farnham. He was a lumberjack, so he chopped down trees, made shingles, which he shipped down the Allegheny River to sell. Now, in 1865, while he was chopping down a tree, it fell on him and it killed him. I would say that's a tragedy by accident. Another second great grandfather would be Kenshin A. Boone. On December the 11th, 1863, Kenshin Boone, he was only 45 years old at the time. He was killed by jayhawkers, leaving his wife a widow at the age of 32 with 6 children between the ages of 6.5 months and just under 17 years. The 6.5-month-old child was my great grandmother, was Mary Eugenia Boone. That was no accident. Tragedy hit another one of my second great grandfathers. That was George Edward Evans. Now, he was a Texas Ranger, so he knew how to handle a gun. However, while cleaning a gun, it went off and it killed him. Here I am at the old Pioneer Cemetery in Junction, Texas. This is Edward Evans's headstone. One more second great grandfather, and that would be John Drennan. On June 8, 1899, John Drennan bent over to get a drink of water from the Concho River that's near his home in San Angelo, Texas. Now, when he did this, his gun fell out of his holster, it went off, and an accident, it killed him. Okay, let's go back a couple more generations. My fourth great grandfather, Martin King, was one of many killed during the Taylor Sutton feud. On October the 6th, 1876, he was playing cards in a saloon. When leaving the saloon, he was shot in the back. That was near the end of the feud, 1876. My third great grandfather, Thornton Chisholm, was accidentally killed in March of 1868 while he was hauling freight from Austin to Fort Concho. The accident happened when the caravan that he was with was somewhere near the present town of Burnett in Burnett County, Texas. He was descending a steep hill with his load of freight, and the wheel team was trying to hold the wagon back when a breast chain broke and let the wagon plunge forward. Now, when it did this, it threw Thornton to the ground in front of the wheels, and the heavy-loaded wagon passed over his body. He was buried where he was killed, beside the old trail. I'd like to go back another generation or two to my fifth great grandfather, Josiah Taylor. He was the father and grandfather of many of the men that died in the Taylor-Sutton feud. Now, he passed away in 1830, which was quite a few years before the feud had started. However, may I say, Josiah was one tough dude. He fought at the Battle of Medina in 1813, the bloodiest battle ever fought in Texas. Out of 1,400 men, 1,100 were killed. Captain Taylor was one of only 300 who survived the battle. His escape was possible because of the superb horse that he rode. He received 7 wounds in the battle with 2 rifle slugs in his body that was removed after the long ride back to Louisiana. Now I'd like to just talk about maybe about a half a dozen of my cousins that were killed in the Sutton-Taylor feud. Looking at this picture here, on the left is a Sutton and on the right is a Taylor. That happens to be Fancy Jim Taylor. I don't really talk about him in this, but I do talk about Jim Creed Taylor. He was one of the last to be killed at the end of the feud. Now, I don't have a photo of my third great granduncle, Dick Chisholm. However, here's a picture of my first cousin, 5 times removed, William Buck Taylor. They called him Buck. Now, these two were the first to die from the Taylor Sutton feud. On Christmas Eve, 1868, they were shot and killed by Bill Sutton and Doc White. This is Scrap Taylor. My first cousin, 5 times removed, Rufus Scrap Taylor Jr., along with Jim White and Kate Tuggle, were hung to death by Ed Payton of the Sutton Gang in 1875. Here's my first cousin, 5 times removed, Philip Goodbread Doughboy Taylor. Now, he was called Doughboy because his mother's maiden name was Goodbread. Well, Doughboy was shot 4 times and killed by Sim Holstein of the Sutton Gang in November of 1871. On the left, you see my fourth great granduncle, Pitkin Taylor. He was shot and killed by the Sutton Gang in March of 1873. Bill Sutton and 4 of his followers went to Pitkin's place late one night. There was a field of heavy green corn near the house, so the assassins removed a bale from an oxen, climbed over into the field, and began to break down the corn and ringing the cowbell. Pitkin heard the commotion. He thought that the cattle may have broken into the cornfield. So he got out of bed, got dressed, went out to the cornfield to investigate. Sutton and his men shot him down. This was Jim Creed Taylor's dad. I mentioned Jim Creed in that picture when I was showing you Fancy Jim. Jim promised to kill the man that killed his dad. And here's Jim Creed Taylor, my first cousin, 5 times removed. He fulfilled his promise to kill the man that killed his dad. Jim Taylor and Bill Taylor caught up with Bill Sutton and his friend Gabe Slaughter at Indianola. Jim and Bill Taylor shot and killed Bill Sutton, the man that killed Jim's dad, Pitkin. Jim Taylor had picked up Sutton's gun. Where he dropped it, it was Dick Chisholm's gun, which Bill Sutton had taken off of Dick Chisholm when he killed him back Christmas Eve in 1868. Jim began negotiations to give himself up and stand trial. He came into Clinton to see his wife and children. He met them at my fourth great-grandfather's place, Martin King. Jim went into the street. He wanted to meet up with Sam Lackey, an attorney in Clinton, Texas. On January the 1st, 1875, Jim was shot and killed by Kit Hunter. You notice how Jim's headstone doesn't have doves or angels. It has crossed rifles. I'd like to talk about just one more Taylor, and it was another Jim Taylor. This Jim Taylor was shot and killed, though, back in 1852, way before the Sutton-Taylor feud had ever started. My fourth great-granduncle was the first Taylor born in Texas. He was shot and killed by William Turner in Stockton, California on September 1852. James had just returned from South America, where he had been on a trip with the Flores expedition. He was a desperate man and generally feared by his associates. He followed gambling for a living. The incident originated from the breakage of some bar fixtures in the White Rose Saloon on Center Street in Stockton, California. Now, while I don't have a photo of Jim Taylor back in the 50s, I do have this photo, which was about the same time frame. The photo of Center Street in Stockton shown here was in 1853, so it was about a year after he was murdered. James Taylor was standing in front of the El Dorado Saloon on the levee when he was shot at 3 times by William Turner. One bullet hit him in the head, another in the side, and the third bullet penetrated his heart. Here's another photo from 1853. You're supposed to be able to see the El Dorado saloon, but I sure can't find it. We've already talked about Glenn Thornton. He was crushed by his wagon. Now I'd like to talk about his wife's great-grandfather, my sixth great-grandfather, Pierre Four. He was a son of Huguenot parents, Pierre Four Sr. and Mary Agui. They were natives of, I can't speak French or pronounce it right. I'll just say they were from France. The family arrived in the colonies on March the 5th of 1700 aboard the ship La Nassau and was part of a large group of Huguenot refugees fleeing from France. Peter moved to Kentucky during the winter of 1779-1780. He had 7 of his children with him and some of his grandchildren also. They settled at Martin's Station on the banks of the Stoner Creek. So keep in mind, this is during the Revolutionary War. So the British, along with their allies, in this case the Shawnee tribe, were out to kill Americans. In 1780, Captain Henry Byrd advanced on the settlement with both British and Indian troops. And for the first time on the Kentucky frontier, they brought artillery. Settlers knew they had little chance of holding out against a cannon and surrendered to the forces with assurances from the British that they would be captured and not killed. Captain Byrd had promised his Indian allies part of the plunder in return for not killing the settlers, but 20 were killed on the site, including my sixth great-grandfather, Pierre Four, and the remainder were forced to march on foot to the British stronghold at Detroit. Those that survived the march were kept prisoner there until the end of the Revolutionary War. However, Pierre's daughter Judith, which is my fifth great-grand-aunt, could not keep up and was killed and scalped by the Shawnee. Before this video turns into a full-length movie, I think I'll just talk about one more story. My fifth great-grandparents, Thomas Banks and Susanna Jarvis, on April 6, 1852, they, along with their children and grandchildren, they began their journey westward from Arkansas to Oregon by way of the Oregon Trail. There were 104 wagons in the caravan that was headed towards the Oregon country. Some of the wagons split off and headed towards California, while they stayed on the trail towards Oregon. As you can see from this chart, my ancestors were with the Ingram wagon train. That would be number 1, or the Green Line. So 3 different wagon trains had merged when they got to Ham's Fork. And then when they got a little farther down the road to Thomas's Fork, that's where some of the people split off and traveled to California. At this point in time, the Ingram wagon train had 16 families and 71 people. They did eventually make it after 7 months to Oregon City on November of 1852. However, my fifth great-grandparents had both died from cholera. Thomas Banks was the first to pass away September the 2nd, 1852 in Umatilla County. And that was in Oregon. And he was buried where he had died in an unmarked grave near the Umatilla River. What you see here is a photo of the Umatilla River. My fifth great-grandfather is buried somewhere along the shores of this river. Susanna passed away soon after and was buried where she died. She was buried in an unmarked grave near the Burnt River in Oregon. If you have a story about any of your ancestors, I'd like to hear about it in the comments section below. Thank you. Are we there yet?